Hidden behind the event plane, the story on the exodus of the Horde provides an allegorical take on the clash between tradition and the unknown, on the role that heroism plays in bridging the gap between the potentially rich, but vague, terrifying and even destructive Great Mother, and reassuring but possessive and even tyrannical Great Father. It is worth mentioning that, considering the quality of the video game, the effort invested and the thoroughness displayed under very limited conditions, we cannot overlook one fundamental fact. Each of the characters I plan to mention, although classified among the representatives or manifestations of one of the three aforementioned abstractions, the known, the unknown, and the intermediary process, is also an actor, that is, an individual with their own developmental path, motives, beliefs, weaknesses, and strengths. Therefore, reducing them to just one of the two roles, either allegorical or active, inevitably leads to incorrect conclusions. It should also be noted that the narrative part of Warcraft 3 begins with the orcs, even though it involves two short chapters meant to introduce us to the basic mechanics of the video game. Therefore, we learn almost nothing about the life of the Greenskins in Azeroth because the main content, which comes after the Undead campaign, relates to their toils in Kalimdor. However, it should be considered that the previous two parts of the Warcraft franchise covered the interactions between humans and orcs, so this decision by the creators of the third title is not without basis. All of this leads us to the conclusion that we must also rely on the literary treatment of the theme, which pertains both to the birth of the first Horde and the activities after passing through the Dark Portal and Thrall's rise from a slave to a leader. So, let us begin step by step. As with humans, the transformation of reality in the Orcish campaign is heralded by the appearance of the Prophet. However, before the first physical interaction with him, Thrall experiences a vision in his dream where a stranger addresses him directly. In our first video on Warcraft 3, we saw that the Prophet reveals himself to humans exclusively through physical manifestations, so it is worth noting the fact that things are different with Thrall. This suggests visionary abilities, the capacity for anticipation that actually makes him a leader and places him in the class of seers. The visionary ability, I believe, is a consequence of Thrall's developmental path. The unknown is not hinted at to him because of his position in the hierarchy, but he rather anticipates it and then understands it. We have plenty of symbolic confirmations of this, yet in order to piece them together we must return to the original homeland of the orcs. Their life on the planet Draenor is important for two reasons. The first concerns the transformation from a shamanistic tribal community to a more complex form of social organization. This is a complicated process tied to a wealth of sociological thought, but through literature and video games we are indirectly given a view of the two paths that opened up before the orcs. The first is led by Durotan, leader of the Frostwolf clan and Thrall's father, who in his youth expresses a tendency toward unification by questioning those aspects of tradition that prevent it, drawing closer to Orgrim Doomhammer. In the book by Christie Golden, titled Rise of the Horde, we even see him issuing a verbal challenge to Orgrim after the latter expresses doubts about the justifications for violating ancestral customs. The Frostwolf chieftain therefore believes in unifying the population based on mutual closeness, starting from micro level, that is, building a friendship with a representative of another clan, contrary to customs that dictate that interaction between members of different clans, except at the level of leaders, can only take place during the Great Kosh'harg festival. Their union represents a fellowship characterized by brotherhood, noble competition, recognition of the uniqueness of other communities, and a united effort in overcoming challenges. On the other hand, we have Orcish shamans, Ner'zhul and Gul'dan, with the former being a victim of the illusion created by demons, while the latter consciously participates in the transformation and enslavement of his own people for the sake of expanding his personal power. The two of them lead the unification of the tribes on a macro level, convincing clan leaders of the necessity of joint action against the Draenei. Therefore, they represent the creators of an amalgamation that does not strive for mutual understanding and broadening of horizons, but for integration in confrontation with the other, chosen to serve as the scapegoat on the altar of racial unity. Now, as shown in books and the movie, Gul'dan's approach prevails, leading to the gradual transformation of the shamanistic community into a group led by warlocks, perverted into a rampaging horde of bloodthirsty monsters tainted by fell magic and enslaved by the demonic forces of chaos and destruction. However, Durotan, along with his partner Draka and the rest of the clan, refuses to take part in this change, though they remain involved in some collective endeavors to avoid bringing the horde's wrath upon themselves. This brings us to the second important issue related to the green-skinned people's homeland, namely the issue of Thrall's birth. With the gradual spread of Fel, the environment begins to change, and once rich wilderness starts withering away, making way for wastelands, thirst and hunger. It is in such a world that the conception, which will result in the birth of Go'el or Thrall, occurs. This very wasteland serves as an argument in favor of passing through the dark portal into a new, fertile world. In the movie depiction of the story, Draka gives birth immediately upon arriving in Azeroth, and Gul'dan, who assists her in the process, seeing that the baby is stillborn and determined not to let the first orc born in the new world perish, sacrifices a nearby deer using Fel and breathes life into the future leader of the renewed horde. Thrall, therefore, is marked by the energies of chaos from the very beginning. However, the passage itself is filled with symbolism that deserves attention. In most depictions of the Dark Portal, besides the two figures carved into the pillars, we see either a dragon's head or a snake at its top. It is important to note that the appearance of the portal is not identical in every segment of Warcraft, so we see it without these ornaments in Prophet's Recollections, while in the missions on Draenor, as well as WoW's menu screen, we see it in the previously described form. Regardless, the presence of the snake or a dragon is of great significance here, as it represents one of the strongest archetypal symbols. When discussing the snake, we can reflect on the phenomenon of the numinous, that is, the simultaneous presence of unrest and awe, which elicit both fear and trembling as well as interest and attraction. This duality of character makes it both an agent of death and a confirmation of transformation and rebirth. Its venom is as terrifying and captivating as its ability to shed skin. Taking this as a starting point, we can describe its presence above the gate as follows. As medicine is contained within poison and poison within medicine, so too is order contained within chaos and chaos within order. This is the hallmark of the Dark Portal. On the other hand, we also have the figure of the dragon, which, with its majestic and terrifying appearance, overshadows the portal, symbolizing the precosmogonic dragon of chaos or eternity, known by the term Uroboros. In order to understand this symbolism, we can refer to Jordan Peterson, who states that the primordial therimorphic serpent god, often depicted as the Uroboros, represents endless potential and the union of opposites. This self-devouring snake or dragon symbolizes the fusion of contradictory elements, matter and spirit, known and unknown, order and chaos. As a snake, it is tied to the earth and matter, while as winged creature, it connects to the sky and spirit. This duality reflects the balance between masculine principles of order and feminine principles of creativity and chaos. Moreover, Uroboros embodies the concept of transformation, as it can shed its skin and be reborn, signifying the possibility of turning chaos into order and vice versa. It represents the undifferentiated potential that exists before active exploration and classification. As the source of all experience and knowledge, Uroboros is both the origin and the final destination of all things, uniting beginnings and endings in an eternal cycle. It symbolizes primal reality, the mystery from which all known and unknown aspects of existence emerge, and the continuous transformation of the predictable into the unknown. Turning back to the game, we can say that the portal was opened by sacrificing the Draenei, that is, through the destruction of life, but it created a bridge to a world that enabled the survival of life. By passing through it, the orcs enter an intermediate space, the primordial soup, and it is precisely there, floating in a vast and incomprehensible expanse of space-time between the old and new worlds, that Draka experiences contractions. The portal is a mystery that arises when the solution to the problem of the destruction of the old world creates a new problem of relentless conflicts and slavery in the new world. The primordial soup is an ocean of chaos that surrounds Draka as the island of Thrall's knowledge, though it is also her source, pushing her out on the other side. It is simultaneously the cosmic space that surrounds the planets Draenor and Azeroth, occasionally breaking through into them, sowing seeds of destruction and creation. From the human perspective, it transforms the temporarily predictable world of Azeroth into the unknown, introducing new forces that seek their place. However, alongside this force of destruction, it also creates a glimmer of hope, whose life is ensured by the sacrifice of others. The ambivalent nature of the portal therefore allows for the birth of positive potential, Thrall, from negative potential. This idea can be further supported by examining the meaning of Orcish names. Thus, at birth, Thrall receives the name Goel, which in English translates as to redeem. This phrase has multiple potential interpretations. If we look at what Oxford languages offer, his name can be reshaped as the Redeemer, but also the Deliverer or even the Covenant Keeper. Having lost his parents shortly after birth, Goel ends up as a slave and a gladiator. Through his own suffering, he symbolically atones for the sins of his people, later contributing through his actions to securing alliances among races, enabling the survival of life and halting the forces of destruction in whose name the orcs had previously destroyed it. Hence, the Redeemer. On the other hand, the name Thrall, as an Old English word for slave, speaks to his fate in the dungeons of Durnhold Keep. He undergoes a process of initiation, being exposed to a terrifying and violent experience, but emerging from it as a grown individual, a warrior equipped with the knowledge of the accumulated consequences of adaptive behavior. Thrall learns from humans who have been present in Azeroth for centuries, developing the necessary spectrum of skills and knowledge that lead to the deliverance of the orcs from the lethargy into which they fall. However, the seer goes a step further, so in later conflicts with Grom and then Manroth, he also leads the liberation from slavery under the demons, hence the Deliverer. In the end, Thrall unites the orcs and other races into a new horde and forms an alliance with the humans under Jaina's command. In the spirit of what was previously said about Durotan and Orgrim, and to the pride of his father, he shows that he sees beyond what has been and can grasp what is possible. Opposed to demonic unification through destruction and bloodthirstiness, which leads to Orcish exclusivity, by saving the Trolls and Tauren and later allying with Jaina, he leads to unity in common struggle and hope. This also covers the third, rarest interpretation of the mentioned phrase, which relates to the fulfillment of a promise or a covenant, hence the Covenant Keeper. Now, Thrall's character in the video game is shaped in contrast to Grom, who, not coincidentally, was the first to participate in Gul'dan's transformation ritual. His role in the orcs' deliverance is irreplaceable, just as his actions significantly contributed to their enslavement. Grom is the medium through which the influence of the Great Father, tradition, order, but also tyranny, is symbolically expressed in Kalimdor. The transformation into tyranny is driven by the desire to eliminate the threat of the unknown through a symbolic immersion in extremist traditionalism. However, the Deliverer brings the awakening, touched by the noble influence of the unknown, victoriously returning from the underworld with new allies. This unknown is foreshadowed by the Tauren through the cult of the Earth Mother and primarily manifested by the Night Elves.